So welcome to this week's Treasury Career Corner podcast, where I interview Treasury professionals about their Treasury careers. Each and every week, I talk to treasurers about how they've built their careers, where they are now, and where they see both themselves and the Treasury profession going to next. This week's episode is slightly different in that I'm joined by Doug Williamson. Now, Doug is actually the course director for finance eLearning at the University of Cambridge Institute of Continuing Education. But he's also been heavily involved for many, many years with the ACT, the Association of Treasurers in the UK, and Treasury Education. And I've known Doug throughout that period. And actually, I thought, you know what, this is a topic that comes up a lot of the time. Lots of people are sort of saying that we want to know about, should we pursue education qualifications? Should we do this? We were just talking before the show about learning and development for different people. And I'll let Doug dive in with that because he's got some really great sort of snippets for people and to really understand. But Doug, you've had many years in sort of, you started out within accounting and then developed through that and then went into the education side. Let you tell your story and then we'll deep dive a bit more in the education and some of the thoughts you've got on that for the next, half hour or so.
Trained as a chartered accountant with KPMG. That's about 1% of the graduate population is doing at the time. I was group tax manager with Virgin. My claim to fame there would be I would have strangled Virgin Radio at birth. As I saw the proposal and thought, this will never fly. So good job they didn't listen too much to the bean counters at Virgin. We were expected to scurry on behind and catch up. So that was a good lesson in what I don't know so well. Following that, I was an interim finance manager, and one day there were some treasury issues, but no treasury department in the company I was working in. The finance director, also interim, came in with a job advertisement from the Financial Times. It said foreign exchange, funding, various other treasury issues, salary per annum about twice what I'd ever earned before. And he said, is this the sort of thing you might be interested
You're like,
in?
Maybe.
I said, yes. I've never done it before. He said, that's okay, just do your best. So I was interim treasurer, not having done it before, and you could say made my mistakes with other people's money, got my learning with other people's money. During that period, a colleague said, did you know there's a professional qualification in this? I said, no. He said, well, my friend's just taken it and the past exam papers cost £25 each, but she'll give you hers. She's just passed one paper, failed another. Took the qualification, thought the training was brilliant, but could be improved upon. And from that point, that was 1999. By 2000, I was marking exams, marking with things called progress tests. Back in the day, you'd by post write out handwritten script, post it back to the ACT. They'd post it to a marker. I'd mark it, post it back, got posted back to the student.
So you were in the very inception. Then, how long had it been going for then? Some of the exams and things like that, because originally it was more of an association, and then it graduated into sort of actually we need to assess this. How far were they on that journey at that stage? Do you think?
I think there were, from memory at that point, about 20 years in and about 15 years in of compulsory exams.
Yes.
You used to get an asterisk depending whether you were by invitation or you passed the assessments. Yeah, I think I'd say there was a very good system well in train at that point, and a very well integrated system, and I would say a good student experience by those days' standards, where there wasn't the expectation of instantaneous feedback. You did have to wait 2 weeks.
And then you carried on with these a series of different roles, or how did it then evolve for your career and things?
I guess I was involved both with teaching and writing material, writing assessments from 2001 through to about 2016. During that period, fairly early on, I realized you can't teach people everything. You have to, in some way, get them in a place where they can teach themselves. So that stimulated an interest in coaching. My first wife had retrained as a life coach. I had some life coaching. And the very first thing I read about life coaching from the coach said the client, Doug, remains entirely responsible for all of his actions,
Right.
omissions, and their consequences. I liked that idea in terms of empowering the client. I also liked it from the perspective of the coach, saying, I don't need to worry whether he or she does what he or she said she would. And I guess that was quite parallel with students, because most students will engage. A minority are incredibly hard to engage, and they're going to fail their exams. And as a tutor, you just have to relax about that and say, okay, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. So that made me appreciate there's a significant coaching motivation element to all teaching at its best, I feel. And I've been learning more about coaching since, and currently continuing my learning and education about coaching and continually trying to integrate it with the finance. Then I guess the other strand to it was, I used to think online courses were all rubbish. I think there have been a lot of quite poor ones out there. And I think you can go back about 40, even 50 years and read computers are going to make human teachers redundant. Doesn't seem to have quite happened yet, but I think recently there's been some fantastic developments in online learning. So I'm an immense enthusiast, and that was why I was so excited to work with Cambridge to develop and then deliver online courses, having been a student of one that was very brilliantly taught by my coaching tutor, Keith Nelson.
You just mentioned there about the sort of different attitudes to learning and things like that. Now, you were coming into ACT coaching, training and all that world. That's Treasury professionals, particularly focused within the UK a lot of the time, but Treasury professionals who want to learn. They're not, they're paying for this. So whereas if it's state education and you're anything, below 18, 16 in the UK, you have to go to school. Those are the rules. These guys weren't rules bound. Did you find that a big difference with those people that were coming to you, that they really wanted to grab the learning, or some of it was just a faff? Or
there's a great range. So at the top end, the gentleman I've had the honour of nominating, Joe Scattergood, I hope will be on ACT Council. He was an example of, I'm here to learn, and I guess the qualifications are a process of focusing, structuring that learning and putting a time scale on it. How many people are like that? Truly, well, the more the merrier. And I guess many have got the potential to do that, and you want to evoke that. There are others. Another one was speaking about his colleague and saying, my colleague did this fantastically well. He was brilliant at managing his time. He did the absolute bare minimum to just get through. My target is to get 52% in the exam. And if I do the very least I could, but I get the badge, then I've done well. I fear there is still quite a bit of that. And out of student group, I like to believe everybody has the other motivation within them and you can evoke it. However, I guess it's a matter of, if you've got an assessment, until people are reassured they'll pass the assessment, and until you can show them that's just a starting point, it's a bit like passing your basic driving test. So much more to learn. And I guess that's the best thing one can do to stimulate that, is get a recent ex-student and say, here's how I got through my assessments, my exams. However, here are all the things I've learned since. This is just one step on a very long journey. Or to put it in a more negative way, you're at the bottom of another extremely long and greasy pole, because all of that knowledge is just assumed, as you were mentioning before we started, that's a minimum. What else? What's different about you? So these differentiating things. And I guess to me, that's the application part, or the development part, as in learning and development. It's not just knowing stuff and demonstrating them and know it. It's, I can apply it, tailor it, and ideally, thinking of the Treasury context in particular, see the perspective of the one who's on the other side of the negotiating table. So I think that's my key takeaway is, can I put myself in the seat or the shoes of the one I'm negotiating with now? And if I can do that successfully, I'm going to have much better negotiations, outcomes, relationships.
I think it's also interesting. And I wonder how many, this would be an interesting one, whether you'd ever get an honest answer. The perspective of those particularly in the earlier stages of their careers, so we talk about getting on a shortlist, and actually I've done a video about this, about accept the fact that if you're not going to do exams, you're not going to do professional development, you won't make some of the shortlists for some of the jobs. I mean, we said, well, it's not fair, I'm really good at Treasury. Yeah, you are, but we haven't got the bit of paper, we haven't got the proof that says it. Well, why is that important? So, well, because the other 9 people standing in that line actually have done it. They've gone through that. Now, whether that was 3 years ago, 5 or 10 years ago, but they've still got that bit of paper. And then, so it goes into a perspective thing. When you're talking about, I think it's great that, as you say, you've got those people who are trying to think what's on the other side of the table, trying to get a win-win and everything else, but it's a different perspective because we also get the feedback, which is another way of assessing those exams, if that's the right way to put it. But we get this, someone will do the study, it might take them a year, it might take them 2 years, and they get the AMCT level qualification or, the equivalent as now, I know they rename them a little bit and stuff. But people come up to me or come up to us and they say, right, I don't know the exact pricing of them now, but they're not cheap. They say, well, my employer has paid for this ACT. Oh, great. And they say, and I want another job. And they're like, right. And they won't give me a pay rise. I said, right, so you've done this. They've given you $5,000 of training, yes. And now you've walked into your boss's office and said, I've got this extra qualification. What's my pay rise going to be? And they're like, yeah. And I said, is that why you've done it? Yes, I have. And I think actually maybe, people need to sort of step back a little bit from that and say, right, is that the reason? I'm not criticizing it. It's just the way of the world. People need to, if you're going to educate yourself, you want to sort of leverage that. Of course, I just think sometimes, as soon as people, within a month, how many of the listeners have got their ACT, and whether it's ACT or CTP or other qualifications in Europe, how many of those you guys out there are listening to this today and saying, right, once I've got that bit of paper, this is going to say, this is what you should give me as a pay rise. And that'd be, I'm not going to ask it in our Treasury salary survey, but it might be something I'd like to understand more, actually. It's quite an interesting one. I don't know if you've ever seen that, Doug, yourself, or...
Well, when you say win-win, I guess the classic example I have is speaking to students who want support and want leave, and I always say offer something up. Flipping it about, let's say the candidate is now sitting in the seat of the manager. The manager is accountable for all the money they're spending, which is the money on the salaries and the money on the support. They need to show that there's more value added to the organization than what they've spent. So if I'm going to have 15 grand spent on me, then I need to demonstrate preferably 30 plus of value add for the company. And I don't know, it's quite interesting. I don't know how many people can or can't do it naturally, but just to say, I wonder what it looks like from the other side of that desk. I'm accountable for the costs and you're a cost. I suppose it's a transition from families home. I don't know, when did that penny drop for yourself? If you're thinking about, this idea, I must add more value than I'm capturing for myself. That's the way it works.
In a practical sense, and again, I've talked about this before, where sometimes where we're doing the fee negotiation with a client, and they're saying, well, why would I pay this, fee? And we've got these cheaper guys. I said, well, no, use the cheaper guys, and then I'll be speaking to you in 6 to 8 weeks' time. And they walk back in, and and it's not, look at me on a go. It's much more about, if I can't find you a great treasurer who, say the fee for me finding them is £50,000. If I can't get you someone that adds, we talk about, and I've got treasurers that will go into new jobs and they will spend, they say in their first week, they want to pay back my fee, but the cost in the first month, they want to pay back their wages, but then and then they spend the rest of the year, the next 11 months, sort of trying to continue to the multiples and add that value, because decent treasurer, a renegotiation of their cash pools or, working out, where actually we should be hedging this, and actually why aren't we doing it this way? Within moments, our treasury guys, if they're worth their salt, which and anyone listening today hopefully is, because they have the wiseness to listen to this podcast. But joking aside, the guys that quantifying and making sure that you're adding value, I think is a critical thing as well. And that obviously they get that through your, I'm not going to. There's a couple of great phrases that Doug's given me, which I've got written down. I keep on wanting to say them, but I'm going to let him say them because they're coming from the horse's mouth, as it were. So Doug, say more about some of the stuff, if you would, that you and I spoke before about, your thoughts around training as well, and the learning, because I thought it was very insightful.
I love this concept of win-win or no deal, which is this from Stephen Covey, whereby he says, if we can't find this win-win outcome today, go with my blessing, perhaps we can negotiate again. And just seemed the example you said is go with the cheaper guys, but saying that sincerely, without any.
I had this at first. I studied at the Northwestern in Chicago, and we had a lady that had actually been a negotiator for the United Nations, and we didn't realize the level of some of these people. And this lady was exceptional. One of my favorite stories was she started handing around her book at the end. She'd written a book. It was amazing. She said, do you want me to put it to Mike? I went, no, actually, just sign it. And as soon as she did that, she was like, we had quite a bit of banter. I said, brilliant. That's straight onto Amazon. She was like, I hate you English people. But one of the best bits was some of the further training she gave us. And I realized that I wasn't a very good negotiator. What I realized was I was a very one-sided negotiator, that I wanted to make sure that the client was happy. But at the end of the day, that was sometimes it couldn't be at the expense of me. And actually, it's one of the things that I was like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And actually broke it down. And I came out of that, it really changed my mind, because I said, I got the best deal. They got a really great deal. Everyone else won, but it wasn't as win-win as it could have been. And I was just fascinated. I've still got some of her information. I'll try and find it in the show notes. Amazing work. Incredible. But exactly as you say there, it's really weird to look at it in that situation.
Going with the win-win and the negotiation, the other thing, and this is again directly from Stephen Covey, if I can articulate the other person's perspective to their satisfaction first, then things start going brilliantly well. So if I've understood correctly, your perspectives are these, your concerns are that, and you're seeking to achieve so-and-so. And just by explaining that back to people, seems to work brilliantly well in any sort of exchange. It seems to me that the advantage, going back to your person who doesn't want to take exams, is you will be taught things that are not within your current or past roles. You'll broaden it out, so it will both be colleagues within your own organization, but especially the counterparty. Let's say you're in a corporate treasury and it's the bank, say loan negotiation. Why does the bank want that clause? What's the bank's perspective, and then where might we get to? These would be very typical assessment questions. Articulate both sides, and then suggest how things might be compromised. But just to be able to explain that back. So I think for me, that's the real value of taking learning and qualifications and having to write down answers. So you literally have to express the point of view of what in worst cases is the enemy or the greedy so-and-sos, and the other side of it is our partners.
Yeah, and I living in their shoes and everything else. And, I love some of the writing. It got me doing this when I first ever started recruitment, actually. Really, some of the lessons in that really helped. But you mentioned there about, and this is the key topic with yourself, Doug, about exams and learning and everything else. We were talking before about the sort of, we've touched on the online learning, but more about the, what people... need to think about, if they're perhaps earlier in their careers about learning and some of the tips you might give, or later on, where do you sit in that? What sort of advice do you give to some of your students, I think?
Continuous development, and it's evidence of, let's say I'm going to recruit somebody. I want someone who will learn what we need to teach them about the role and the organization, and then will then take initiatives to learn, apply, develop more so, and give that value back to our organization. And I want them to do that on their own initiative, rather than just following through a list that has been given to them. So therefore, evidence of continual development in whatever dimension, really. And I've heard this from a client who I was giving finance training for. He said, great, the most important thing about your training is that people are developing. I don't care what they're developing. It's just the fact they are developing something. And in practice, that does seem to be rare that people are into lifelong learning and development. There seems to be a bit of a view of, or perhaps has been, when there's an overemphasis on qualifications, that they're important, but they've got a place, but they're not the be all and end all, that once I've learned my stuff, almost the more years that pass without me doing anything else, the smarter I get. And I think the opposite is the case. It's about 5 years. So in other words, the intellectual property or the intangible asset has got roughly a 5-year life, and anything you didn't apply, you'll have forgotten again.
It's an interesting one there. You say that. I'll be selfish here. I'm Aira, who works for us, Aira Cannon, or a lot of people who will speak to us will speak to Aira. She'll be your first point of contact. But I'm putting her on, she's on a training course on Wednesday, and it's something I've been keen to get her on about, copywriting and writing different adverts. We have a very honest voice. You know, we see different people advertising roles and things like that. There's a lot of BS out there. I hate it.
Yeah.
You know, I said, look, write with an honest voice. If the role is going to be rubbish, right, it's going to be a rubbish role. For the first 3 months, you're going to go in there. It's going to be really challenging. And the next 3 months, you're going to improve everything else. And then the sort of 6 to 9 months, you're really going to get on top of it. By year one, this is going to be just like tuning a car. It's going to be a fully tuned, Put that in there, because otherwise, you're setting someone up to fail, and it frustrates. But going back to Aira and going on the course, I want my return on that course. That client of yours, and they're saying, I just want someone learning. I'm not sure. I'm not saying I buy into it. I think it's a great idea, but very altruistic. But how can they justify it? They've got a massive budget or big pockets.
I would say that they're switched on.
Switched off. That's what it is. Damn you.
It's from the military. I spent a brief time in the Territorial Army, but there's a phrase that someone would come into the room and they'd say switch on. So essentially, is somebody engaged or not engaged? So in support of the client, and it would be my view, so long as somebody is switched on, in other words, more of their
engaged
brain is firing away, then they will move in directions that are positive. They will keep growing and developing. And if people are switched off, they're not productive, not valuable. It doesn't mean that they don't understand what the organizational issues are. It is surprising how, they can say Treasury or business is about everything. Treasury is about cash, therefore Treasury is about everything, because everything turns back into cash
in that way
eventually.
And actually, just to put it in perspective, I would say I'm not putting her on the course. She wanted to go on the course. It was we identified back last year, so that what else should I be doing? And she said, actually, I would like some development and coaching on this. Could you go? So I said, right, I can give you this level. I said, actually, there's some other levels that you can go to, and this guy's great. What do you think? And she was like, oh, I'd like to do that. Also, Danielle, our ex-colleague, she'd done it, and she'd made a heck of a difference to her writing and performance and everything else, which she loved. Again, it was driven, self-driven. So going back around some of the other stuff, it's not just for a pay rise. It's not just for this. It's more, makes her life more interesting, actually, and more enriched. I don't know, you see the similar as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's more fun to do a great job. Much more fun.
And before we, head towards the end of the program, we've still got another, 5 or 10 minutes. But, what are the other areas, you think that, again, we've deep dived here. We've got people listening today and they're going, well, this is all very well. You guys, having this chat. I've got a day job to do. I've got loads of Treasury things coming at me. What would you say if those guys are stepping back, or if they're looking at, assessing themselves, what are the sort of ideas you would try and throw out there to them, would you say?
Pick up as many qualifications as you can, speak to as many people as you can, write as much as you can. I think that the value of there's been no greater opportunity to write, social media, etc. And if people are in the habit of writing, you actually improve your thinking as you write, and people will engage with you. I guess it's appropriate engagement and responses, and it's always have a plan. Any plan. In other words, if I'm motivated, if I'm switched on, if I've got a sense of movement and direction, then I'm going to move purposefully. It might mean I then say, whoops, that didn't quite work out. Let's backpedal, or let's take a different tack. But to be moving with a sense of purpose and long and short-term goals, and let yourself change your mind appropriately as well. So, this is the real tricky bit: is don't do things for too long, but don't ship out too quickly either. And I guess that's then where your role comes in, is you've seen the longer term path for so many different people, ideally can support those kinds of decisions.
It's interesting when you say about getting that learning. It's way back, the first ever podcast I did. And for anyone listening back to that first ever podcast, I can just say sorry, I got better. All right. So Sarah Jane Hall, Global Treasurer GSK, her advice was very similar to yours, Doug, where she just said, look, learn a bit more and then keep learning. And it was just, okay. She said, look, if you get those bits of paper, whether it's an MBA, whether it's an ACT, whether it's, whatever qualification, whatever, if that people never take that away. It's always in your back pocket, and it's always going to help you in some ways because you're choosing to do it, sort of thing, which, and that holds true, 100 episodes later. And it's, what does she know, eh? Sarah Jane Hall, Global Treasurer of GSK. Oh, yeah. Look at that career. She's an absolute legend and a wonderful lady.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So it's, that's one of the key things I would say to the people listening to, listen back to that. And actually, if it's backed up by her, and actually there's a number of other ones we've done where people have just said, it was Conor Marr, he made a few moves. And one of the key things he said was jumping between roles and things. But one of the key bits he brought out was don't just rely on it in, just singularity, but as part of a blended thing. But it was, again, it was part of the mix sort of thing as well. That was a good episode as well. So
I guess the other thought I have is the sorts of learning I'm undertaking and encouraging others to do. Some of them are quite easy. They don't take long and they're not expensive.
Yeah.
So there is a thought, every qualification or every academic thing I do gets harder, takes longer, it's more expensive. Yeah. Just to take an example, I've recently passed an advanced driving test. Right. It cost me less than £100 in total. It's been immensely useful in just observing behavior and observing information flows. So it's been fantastically helpful for development. And I would quite literally recommend it to anybody who can drive a car and is working in Treasury, because it will help you with Treasury, because it provides a very clear metaphor and a very stark reflection back to you. And, this is how I'm acting on the road. So that's how I'm acting in all other departments as well. For instance, one of the precepts is take, use, and give information and review what you just did. I was out for a drive with my wife the other day. Something was going on. I saw somebody put their indicator on. I didn't modify what I was doing. We didn't have an accident or anything, but it could have been improved upon. And then I said to her afterwards, well, I took the information, but I didn't use it. I didn't think through, why has that person got their indicator? They were turning down a little side road that I hadn't registered of that might be somewhere someone wants to turn down.
Yeah, hadn't quite clicked sort of thing.
Yeah, but it's then applicable back into abstractions, if you might say, or the other contexts.
Day-to-day things.
And quite interestingly, the examiner taught me a lot about teaching and motivation.
Oh, right.
So the first time I passed, he said, how did he put it? I'm pleased to tell you you've passed. As you might expect, there's one or two things we need to talk about. And then he said, blah, 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 told me the feedback. Then you've got a silver. I hope you're pleased with that. And just this little phrase, I hope you're pleased with that, was very interesting. So it was motivating to me to go back and improve. And I did get a gold 3 years later.
Yeah, it's always out there, isn't it? It's like, well, you've done well, but not quite that well. And you're like, I'll get there one day.
Yeah. And indeed, my instructor, the same examiner, had said to them, you've got a gold, of course, Mike, but you could have done so much more.
Yeah. But well done, son. You're like, cheers to that.
Realism and balance.
Yeah, keeping the two hand in hand. So
precisely.
We're wrapping up today's show. Tell us, if you like, and the guys listening today, maybe again, as we say every week, people will want to maybe connect with yourself and learn about, some of the courses, some of the other things and stuff. What are the top 3 tips? Is something because sometimes people want to follow treasurers and their treasury careers. Now, I think that people want to connect to you because I think you've got some really interesting ideas, and actually definitely follow you as well. That's one of the other things you might want to do. So people look at Doug's background and you might choose to follow him because he's got some really interesting views and some of the things. But on top of that, and looking at yourself, what are the tips that you would give to people listening today and say they've been intrigued enough and think, actually, what should I be doing? What would you say to close today's show?
Share your aspirations. Find an accountability buddy, share your aspirations. Thinking about using LinkedIn, for example, just say, I've done one recently. I'm following the Stephen Covey 30-day proactivity challenge. Just put stuff out there. Think of people you can approach and buddy up with somebody that you dare to share with. Here's what I'm planning to do this year, these 5 years, today, the rest of today. If you get engaged in that sort of a process, you'll get a massive lift in your motivation and productivity.
Great stuff.
Buddy up.
Buddy up.
Short. Buddy up.
Great. We'll have that in the show notes. Doug, amazing for today's show. Thanks for some of the insights.
Great pleasure.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Huge pleasure.
And
really enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah, it's great. And so, yeah, I'd say we'll put a link to Doug's LinkedIn profile in the show notes. If it's right, follow him, maybe connect with him if you think he's going to help you in your Treasury career. You have really good insights there. I think lovely to chat with you as always.
Good.
Yeah, let's keep talking in the future, sir. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you for your wonderful insights as well.
Pleasure. Many thanks.